Jimmy Stewart, classic Hollywood nice guy, or great international smuggler? That's what we're going to be exploring in today's strange tale of a Yeti, Jimmy Stewart, and his wife's underwear, and our first ever strange story from the past. Now, my nephews have made me realize that I have slightly failed in my aunt duties because I never passed along my love of classic Hollywood films to them, so they don't really know who Jimmy Stewart is. And if you're like them and you don't, here is a quick Cliff Notes version of who he was. Jimmy is probably best known for his role as George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, an absolute Christmas classic. As an actor, he made 80 films from 1935 to 1991, earning him 6 Oscar nominations. But he also had a distinguished career as a military pilot, rising through the ranks to become brigadier general. He was known for his unique voice and cadence of speech, as well as his portrayal of idealistic nice guys. You do know that it's taking everything in me to not try to do his voice right now, because it's gonna be bad. I'm not gonna do it. I just tried to do it and it was so bad I had to edit it out. I'll just let the man do it himself.
Magnificence that comes out of your eyes and your voice and the way you stand there and the way you walk. You're lit from within, Tracy.
His heroism both on and off screen, as well as his devotion to family, makes him super relatable to the American public and also makes him this representation of the American ideal of the 20th century. His star doesn't really begin to rise until he teams up with Frank Capra and You Can't Take It With You and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
I will not yield.
The latter which earns him his first Oscar nom. He doesn't marry until he's in his 40s. In fact, the great gossip columnist of the day, Hedda Hopper, actually dubbed him the Great American Bachelor. Does anybody else think that if reality TV was a thing in the 1940s, that he would have been the first bachelor? That is until 1949, when he falls head over heels in love with Gloria Hattrick McLean. So the 1950s will not only see a resurgence of his career when he begins starring in westerns and several Alfred Hitchcock films, but also embroils him and his wife in an international smuggling mystery that will not be solved until 2011. Now our tale begins like any good tale begins, and that is with a Texas oilman, rancher, philanthropist, and cryptozoologist by the name of Tom Slick. Given the story that's about to unfold, one would think that Tom Slick was of the mustache-twirling oil tycoon type, but turns out he's more of the beaker-twirling philanthropic type. Slick's biographer, Lauren Coleman, said that he was very interested in medical mysteries and believed if he could capture a human hybrid Yeti, it could provide answers to disease prevention or medical research. I'm pretty sure that was the storyline for Jurassic World Dominion, and we all know how that turned out. And since he has the money, he ends up sponsoring over 3 expeditions into the Himalayas to search for the Yeti. And they actually do turn up hairs, some interesting footprints, and some eyewitnesses as well. What exactly is a Yeti? It is an ape-like creature that is said to reside in the Himalayan mountains of Asia. Western culture more commonly refers to it as, buckle in because usually I say this word wrong, so fingers crossed, here we go. Abominable snowman. I did a pretty good job there. Often described as a bipedal ape-like creature covered in brown, gray, or white hair, and of course has very large, very sharp teeth. It is often compared to Bigfoot because they have a lot of similar descriptive features. Then he hears rumors about the existence of a piece of evidence that could confirm the existence of the Yeti, and that is a hand of a Yeti deep in the Himalayan mountains in a small monastery in the village of Pengbosh. And I am probably saying the name of that village wrong. So in 1958, he finances an expedition led by Peter Byrne to head to that small village in the Himalayas to get their hands on the hand of a Yeti. I'm sorry, I'm just cracking myself up. All I can think of is like a 70s soft rock group. So Casey and the Sunshine Band, it's Peter and the Yeti hand. Once they make camp, Peter and the gang are just hanging out. And Peter hears one of the custodians speaking in Nepalese, which is not the common language of the area. And Peter speaks Nepalese, so he's like, hey, how you doing? And chats up this custodian. And the guy's a really nice guy. So he's like, you want to see a Yeti hand? I know a guy. I can get you into the Yeti hand. So this nice custodian takes Peter over to see the Yeti hand. A wild Yeti has appeared. Who knew they had such long tails? Yeah. Real quick backstory on why the Yeti hand is so important to the monastery and the village of Pangbosh. Now, the founder of the monastery there, Lama Sangwa Dori, one day had gone out to a cave to meditate, and during his meditation, a Yeti showed up and was like, hey, wow, you're doing some important work there. Let me get you some food. Let me get you some water. Let me get you some stuff to keep yourself warm. So this Yeti revered this Buddhist monk and actually became a Buddhist disciple of his. And then eventually Lama Sangwan Dori left the cave. And then eventually he comes back and he finds that the Yeti had died. So he took the hand and the scalp of the Yeti and took them to the monastery, which he did founded? Yes, he founded in 1667. Now, the sacred relics would periodically leave the monastery to be paraded around the village for fertility rituals, but it was a pretty firmly held belief that if those relics were ever to leave the village, it would bring misfortune upon the village and its residents. Just something to keep in mind as we talk about what Peter Byrne says happened next. Once Peter saw the hand, he had to find out from the boss what the next move was going to be. Now, Nepal had no mail, it had no cables, so to get a message to Tom, he had to send a runner to India. So it would take about 200 miles round trip and about 6 days total to go to India and back. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anybody that Tom Slick's response to that message was, it is imperative that you bring that hand back. And in that big pregnant pause, all I hear in fine print is by any means necessary, right? Because Tom needed it for science. Now, Peter goes back to the monastery and he asks nicely, he pleads, he begs, and their answer is no. But somehow, during that conversation, Peter apparently says exactly the right words, because all of a sudden the no changes to, you can't have the whole hand, but what we'll do, we'll give you a finger. But here's the thing, you got to replace the finger with another finger so that nobody knows there's a missing finger. And you have to give us a very substantial contribution to the monastery. So now Peter is in need of a finger to replace a finger so nobody knows there's a missing finger. So where do you go when you need a finger? Well, apparently London. Upon returning to London, Peter meets up with Tom Slick and a bunch of his cryptozoology friends for lunch. Now at this lunch was quite the cast of characters, and I am going to slaughter all of their names. So if you have delicate ears for proper pronunciation, please cover them now. There was Odette Zarni, who was a socialite turned cryptozoologist author. From the 1950s to the 1970s, she earned the reputation as Britain's most formidable monster hunter. I want to be her friend. There was also Ralph Izzard, who was an English journalist who spent the majority of his career at the Daily Mail, but during World War II, he was a British naval intelligence officer who served under the command of none other than Ian Fleming, who was the author of all the James Bond novels. Oh, and it gets better, because apparently he based some of the elements of his first novel, Casino Royale, on Ralph Izzard in a card game in which he found himself playing poker against covert Nazi intelligence officers at a casino in Brazil. I mean, who are these people? I feel like they're almost like the less cool version of like Mary Shelley and group. And rounding out the cast, you had Dr. Osmond Hill, who was the prosector of Regent's Park Zoo in London, and he was also a preeminent authority on primates. And he turns out to have the answer to the biggest problem they had, which was how to come up with a finger to replace a finger so that nobody knew there was a missing finger. Because he had one, an extra one, laying around somewhere, and he brought it to lunch in a little brown paper bag and just unceremoniously dumped it out on the middle of the table and was like, there you go, finger, problem solved. Drops the mic and goes home. I don't know. But what we do know is that Peter Byrne took that finger and traveled all the way back to Nepal. And then according to Peter, he just shows up with the new finger and about 10,000 rupees as a donation to the monastery, and they're fine with him replacing the finger. Now, to give you an idea, about 10,000 rupees at that time would have been about $160, so it wasn't this hugely substantial contribution to the monastery. So everything is getting a little suspicious. Because also, he can't quite remember which finger he replaced. He thinks it was the index finger. And I'm sorry, if I was replacing a Yeti finger in the Himalayas, I would know if it was a thumb or a pinky or an index finger, right? So the only way I could think maybe you wouldn't know is if you were in a hurry because you didn't want to get caught changing out a finger. You get what I'm putting down? Now, the other story floating around that's not being told by Byrne is that Byrne actually arrived with a bottle of scotch and a Yeti finger and got one of the custodians good and drunk, and then they passed out, and then he changed out the Yeti finger, and nobody was the wiser as to what happened. The next problem that Byrne had was getting the Yeti finger back to Dr. Osmond Hill in London. Part of the problem is that he had another year of his Yeti expedition to do, and also, from what I can tell online, I don't know how true this is because I only found it in a couple sources, but the Nepalese government passed a law which made the killing of Yeti illegal for tourists. And to avoid any hassle, Byrne figured it would be easier to cross into India on foot. Now, once he was in India, he was able to communicate with Tom Slick again, and turns out Tom Slick had a couple of friends that were vacationing in Calcutta at the time. And who were those friends? You guessed it, none other than Jimmy Stewart and his wife Gloria. And they were more than happy to help out a friend by transporting a Yeti finger from India back to London. Peter Byrne meets them at the Grand Hotel. They do the finger pass off. Soon after, the Stewarts pack up to leave for London, but the question remains, where does one hide a Yeti finger? Clearly, the best place to put your unmentionables is in with your unmentionables. And the craziest part is when they get to their hotel in London and they get up to their room and there's all their luggage sitting there, the one piece of luggage that is missing is the lingerie case. And for the next 3 days, they sweated out wondering where the lingerie case is with the Yeti finger. Until one day the hotel clerk rings up to their room and says that there's a British customs agent waiting to speak with them. I'm nervous for them, and I know how this all works out. So cool as a cucumber, Jimmy and his wife invite the British agent up to their room. They sit down, they have a cup of tea and a chat. Turns out all they need to do is sign a receipt, and they hand over the lingerie case. And Gloria noticed the lock hasn't been messed with. In fact, the case doesn't even look to be open. And she asked the British officer if the case had been open. You know, no reason why I'm wondering, but I'm just wondering if you opened my lingerie case. And the British officer responds with, "Oh, madame, certainly not. A British customs official would never open a lady's lingerie case." I don't think that holds today, so don't go trying to hide any cryptid parts in your lingerie case. Now, the Stewarts do pass off the Yeti finger to Dr. Osmond Hill, who does examine it, and based on science of the day and what he knows of both human and primate anatomy, he concludes that it was not human. Now, we don't know what happens to the finger after the doctor concludes his examination of it, but it is believed that it stays within his collection. But upon his death in 1975, the finger goes missing. And sadly, the hand itself will disappear from the Pangbosh Monastery in the 1990s, and with it, the small income they made from donations to view them. And the story doesn't end there. In 2008, a BBC reporter was visiting the Royal College of Surgeons when he saw on display a Yeti finger that was said to be from the Pangbosh Monastery. The BBC will go ahead and have that finger DNA tested, and it will turn out to be human. But it begs the question, is that the same finger that was brought back by Peter Byrne to Dr. Osmond Hill? Or was it just some other random finger that got accidentally labeled Yeti? So really, the mystery still remains. We don't know if the finger found at the Royal College of Surgeons actually was the finger that came from the original Yeti hand, which can't be tested because that original Yeti hand has been missing since 2011. New Zealand mountaineer Mike Alsap has launched a worldwide search to return the original Yeti hand to the Pangbosh Monastery. If you have any information or if you're interested in more information, you can go to returnthehand.com. Mike teamed up with What a Workshop to create a replica of the Yeti hand so that the monks would have something to share with travelers and hopefully restore the small income they enjoyed as a result. Now, what ended up happening with our intrepid group of Yeti hunters? Jimmy Stewart's wife Gloria died of lung cancer in 1994, and a short 3 years later, Jimmy Stewart will follow, dying of a heart attack. As of 2022, Peter Byrne is still alive and looking for Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. In 1962, Tom Slick tragically loses his life in a plane crash. At one point, his life was to be immortalized on the silver screen by none other than Nick Cage in a flick called Tom Slick, Monster Hunter. Unfortunately, the project stalled and we will never get to see that gem, and that is a tragedy. So that is it. I hope you guys really enjoyed today's strange story, and I love hearing from you guys. So go ahead in the comment section below, let me know what you thought. And if you'd like to keep watching more videos, I've gone ahead and selected 2 videos that I think you're going to love. Now, if you want to follow me on all the social media, you can find me as It's Jennifer Elise. I hope to see you in the next video, and remember, the past is stranger than you think. Bye!